So welcome, everybody. Welcome back for those of you who have not been here before. This is the CX Frontiers Book Club, which is basically a place where people who care about customer experience and love reading and geeking out on various subjects come together to do that. So I'm thrilled that you are here. My name is Megan Burns. Because we only have an hour, I don't tend to go through introductions. So if you want to drop a note in the chat of who you are and where you are and a little something about you, feel free. Otherwise, everybody can connect on their own. But you'll get to know each other very quickly as we dig into this book. So our topic for today and our book is Trust Factor by Paul Zak. And I'll do what I usually do. Well, first of all, let me give you a little bit of background as to why I chose this book. A lot of what we do in customer experience is change management. And the more trust you have of the people in your organization and the more trusting your organization overall, the easier it tends to be to drive change. So I thought a book on what trust is and how it forms and ways to increase it would be particularly useful for ourselves internally, but also I know some folks do other work in employee experience too. So that was kind of the background of choosing this book. I'll start by opening the floor for just impressions. What did oh, there's too many of you. I have to go to gallery view. What did people think?
I liked connection of test to something tangible, like the oxytocin. I really like the framing of design culture so that there are moments when you release oxytocin. I mean, that was a new way of thinking. That's why I enjoyed the book.
Yeah, when I first met Paul, he was introduced as the vampire economist because he was the one who discovered the oxytocin chemical and actually somehow managed to get people to agree to letting him draw their blood before and after events to measure oxytocin. So that was one of the things that stood out when I first heard him and met him in 2016. Other folks, first impressions?
I'll go ahead, Megan. I thought it was an easy read and just reinforced a number of things that as customer experience leaders, we're trying to impact on the organization. And I liked how each chapter focused on each of the different elements versus trying to blend a number of them together. So I thought it was great and very good practical examples of low effort and kind of maybe things that would take more of a high effort. So a good balance between the two as well, which I thought was.
Yeah, it is. It's a very pragmatic book. A lot of books on trust are a little bit fluffy is not necessarily the right word, but they're a little vague. And Paul is not vague by any means. So we're going to get into some of those in just a minute. Anybody else overall impressions?
So one thing I mean I come from, I'm a techie in doing computer science work at cutting edge technologies, right? And what I find is there are very few women there. I was one in an organization of 30, and that's typical. At least it's gotten better, but it's still nothing. And so the trust factor, there's a play of gender and race and all of that in that too. And I don't think he ever touches on that. I didn't read the whole book. That's one part. And then startups. The startup culture is again something that's I was looking for all that. I didn't get any of that. Not to say that it's bad. I learned a lot. And I definitely agree with many of the things that he says, right? And I feel like, oh, yes, you're right. How come you're not doing it? Yes. So yeah.
Yeah, and that's a great point. So first of all, a little background on me. I am a software engineer by training. My master's is in software engineering. So been there, done that, totally get it. And you're right. In terms of startups, you're also right. My clients and my experience tend to be mostly with larger companies. So I do probably skew more towards larger companies. From a trust perspective, I'm going to prove how much of a geek I am. I'm going to reach into my bag and pull out HBR's 10 must reads on trust, which includes the original HBR article that was published, the article version of this book. But there is an article in this specifically about race and ethnicity and trust and diversity and inclusion. So if you're interested in that, all the articles in here are generally pretty good. I'm almost done, but there is something in there specifically. The startup conversation, I may have to go ask for some recommendations because that's not really my world. But anybody else want to wait? Yes, Jerry, engineers are cool. Jerry and I are both alumni of RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. So we are both also, both comp sci, right? Jerry, you were computer science too?
Industrial engineering.
Industrial engineering. That's right. All right, so let's get into the meat of this. The first question that I want to ask about is why trust? I found a study from PwC that said executives believe that trust or lack thereof is a huge factor in their company's ability to be successful, but less than half of them are actually doing anything intentionally to try to work on or manage trust. Why do you think that is?
Hey, that was my question.
What's your hypothesis?
I think it's good old human nature. We're all hypocrites. We say all the right stuff, but we don't always do all the right stuff because it's hard. And there are competing priorities.
I think sometimes it's bandwidth. Building trust, it can be a complicated process. You know, and when teams have low bandwidth to take the intentional steps, you're not going to get it.
We have all those habits too of the way we've done things before with the people we already know and are familiar with and have maybe built up some trust, but we're not stretching that for the whole group.
Yeah. Or maybe you assume you have trust.
Good one.
I also feel that it's partly that, you know, it's not part of the bottom line, right? I mean, nobody's measuring any of this. Yeah. And, you know, this goes for many things, climate change, many of those things, you don't put it in the, if it's not part of something that the board is tracking or somebody is tracking, it's not happening.
Yeah, I was going to say something similar, just kind of to be provocative. I think in some regards, we live in a world where we try to believe that feelings and emotions and how we interact with each other actually doesn't matter, even though it's super important. It means a great deal.
Maybe it's too intangible a concept for people to grasp. Like, you know, in the enterprise, like my bank, for example, there's been so many like behavioral scientists coming and breaking down trust for us, ethical trust, like the competency piece of the trust. And maybe it's the unstructured, the intangibility of it that prevents people from actioning it sometimes. Like the stat which stood out to me in the performance part of the book was they did the olfactory survey with several companies, and actually Ovation was the lowest rating in some sort of company grouping, but it's easy to do. Maybe it's the path to increasing it. People are unclear. Just a hypothesis. I mean, I get the bottom line hypothesis. The bottom line logic is also true.
Yeah, these are all factors. And I'm asking this question as if there is a right answer, and there isn't, right? It's all of these factors, including the fact that, and like you said, we often think we have more trust than we actually do. We don't necessarily, and that's something that I'm particularly interested in. But given that we don't consciously think about trust, we still do things to try to gain trust without necessarily recognizing that that's why we're doing it. So that was one of the other things about this book that intrigued me, was that the 8 strategies, and I fully admit and accept that he picked some weird names in the sake of an acronym that really didn't make much sense. And I've told him that, so I may not use them. But these are things that we talk about in customer experience. So I thought it would be interesting to, yes, they talked about how much of an impact Ovation had in these companies that they studied. What about in our own lived experience? Has anybody been through, so just as a reminder, there was Ovation, which is recognition, expectation, facing shared challenges, autonomy and control over how you work, job crafting, openness, sharing information. We talk a lot about silos, caring, investing in people, and being honest and vulnerable. Nobody
Again, I
wants to
can
be honest
share,
and vulnerable today.
I can share an example of transparency, which I think was in the openness piece. Recently, our bank was acquired by another bank, and I led the work stream for customer experience and employee experience. And what I found is people were just grasping for information. And so I held a weekly meeting, whether or not I learned any new information or not in those particular work streams, shared what I knew, asked for what are their questions, what are the things that they need to know in order to do their jobs effectively to migrate and move our customers seamlessly over to the new bank. And it was amazing. Maybe we had 20 people. I think by the end we had over 100 people who are regularly attending these meetings because this seemed to be like a mechanism to obtain information that they weren't receiving through their other channels because it was so siloed, or maybe their boss had left. I mean, there was just a lot of transitioning occurring. So the importance of transition in a high stress environment, and there's a lot of unknowns, was immensely helpful. And even if, like I said, I didn't have any information and it was even beyond my department, I led consumer and business banking, and I had people from wealth and commercial also attending because they just didn't have another outlet to receive that information. So transparency and openness has been absolutely critical as an example.
Yeah, it's funny how saying that's a great question, I don't know, or we haven't decided that yet, can really actually make people trust you more, even though you think you're letting them down. Just being transparent about the fact that it's not that I'm hiding something from you, I don't know yet either. I love that example, Nicole, and I love that you did that. Other folks, examples?
Yeah, something similar. Yeah, with when Nicole talked about, with one of my team members in the CX team, who does a lot of our audits and listens to some of the contact center inquiries to pull out the friction. Does an incredible job finding insights, and it keeps me plenty busy to solve friction. But one of the things I found is like in getting deep into that and bandwidth, I could be doing a better job communicating back where things are at. And I kind of started to sense like a little, less engagement from that team member, and realizing I need to do a better job of keeping them in the loop, even if there's not like a clear update. We don't have a fix yet, but here's what your insights are doing. Here's where we're working them. Kind of woke me up to, I got to keep that trust building too.
Yeah, we tend to assume that other people know the same things we know. And we don't realize that there's stuff that we know that we're not intentionally hiding from people. We just assume everybody knows it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think that's a really important thing. I was hunting, if you saw my eyes moving around, because there's supposed to be a raise hand feature that we've used in the past, and Zoom seems to have hidden it in whatever update they're using right now. So I apologize, but if you want to say something, just raise your actual physical hand or put something in chat. And Doug, you raised your actual physical hand. So why don't you go next?
Yeah, I kind of like raising my physical hand because it's easier than finding the controls, even if they're there. Megan, I agree with you that the naming is a little bit awkward, like Ovation instead of recognition. The one that really hit me, or resonated as, yeah, that has built trust over and over and over again throughout my career and the people I've worked with is, I think he calls it expectation. And that's where you're together working on a challenge that's achievable, but it's kind of a hard thing. So you've got that, you know, I know there are a lot of studies around that's the best way to learn. You've got to be sort of right on that edge, like a surfer on the wave. And it made me think of something else that I only learned about fairly recently, and maybe all of you know it. There's something called the trust equation.
Mm.
It's not formal math, and thank God it's not a funny acronym, but it's like trust is equal to your credibility, your reliability, and your intimacy. And obviously, intimacy there is how well you know somebody. So, you know, if you're not meeting your deadlines, I guess that's reliability. If you don't come with the right background to do a job, perhaps, or if you don't spend the time to get to know people that you're working with, then the denominator in this equation is self-orientation. And the whole idea is you want a numerator greater than the denominator. So credibility, reliability, and intimacy needs to be greater than perceived self-interest. And that can be hard sometimes, because I know for CXers, anything with an X in it, the experience end of things, there's sometimes I wouldn't call it a mistrust, but it's like, oh, well, that's just, you know, customer experience or whatever it might be. It's not quite the serious in the weeds. We got to knock this out. Hard knocks, you know, wear the hard hat code stuff or whatever orientation an organization might have. And so I think those doing positions like that need to gain that much more trust. And you've got to really be quite political in a good way, not a dirty way, to be able to show that it's not self-orientation. It's not like CX rules and should run the world. It's like, no, here's what we bring, credibility. You know, we've brought you what you've asked for, and we've maybe gone that next step to show you a slightly better way. And we've taken the time to get to know you. I just think all of that kind of works together, and it really that really kind of hit me.
Yeah, and Doug, there's about 47 versions of the trust equation, so I'd love to know which one that's from. And they're all right. You know, see your earlier comment about trust being a fuzzy concept. But yeah, having some structure to think about what actually is trust and how do we evaluate other people's trustworthiness, I think is a really helpful thing. Jamur, you've been waiting patiently. And then I'm sorry, what's your first name?
I'm Swapna.
Swapna. Okay, so
Yeah.
Jamur first. Okay. 1 and 2. I'm pointing to you on my screen like you know where you are on my screen.
Sounds good. Now I found the raise hand under the reactions. It's hidden under there. Reactions for some. Anyways.
Okay.
So the thing that stood out to me of all the weird names is transfer or delegation. And you know, and I mean, I can give a work example, but you know, I'm a mom who hasn't figured out the parenting equation because it just goes in different direction the moment I think I figure it out. And my son is 11 going into tween years. So one thing which I think trust is important as we go through the teen years, and what I really do, and this is all experimental because parenting is hard, work is not, is that delegation factor, right? Like if we transfer and give him responsibility of an outcome, I believe he engages more than me, although I know everything that is correct for him. But if I try to give him direction, it doesn't turn out to be good, at least at this stage of his life. And that can be transferred, like, you know, extrapolated to team environment. But I think that transfer is a very important component, but the hardest as well in my mind, right? Because oftentimes you know the right way. You think you know the right way, you know, and probably you do. But that transfer just increases performance. So something I'm experimenting with my son, like, you know, what do you think? Give me not a project plan, give me a plan how you want to achieve this. And then I feel the outcomes are better.
Yeah, the easiest way to earn trust is to give it first, which is a little bit risky.
Yes.
Okay, next.
So I had a follow-up to what Doug was saying, that, you know, that this customer service or expectation fees tend to become the low bar, and it's I have even had managers or people tell me that it doesn't matter how we work with each other as we get our work done. All that matters is we hit the project deadlines. And so that is so common, especially in the tech world. This is so common, and aggressive, deadlines, and working round the clock and not giving people a break, and putting down people who don't do that. And then again, it comes back to that you can't measure the impact of all of this. And so people who do this 10x engineers, they become the stars, but nobody realizes that 10x works goes behind how much of not confusion and bad things they've created in the wake of the 10x. So yeah, that was what I had to add. A very techie perspective, though.
Yeah, no, it's true. And there's an angle or a dimension of trust called psychological safety, which is the other book, Proof. I am a total nerd. The Fearless Organization, which is about psychological safety. It was the #1 factor in high performance teams. And it is a form of trust in the sense of when you're on a psychologically safe team, you trust that people will not use any vulnerability against you. So you feel safe admitting mistakes, you feel safe raising questions. And there is actually extremely hard data, a lot of it from Google, about the quality of the work product that comes out. Doesn't mean you like each other, but it means that you trust each other enough to be willing to say, guys, I think that's a really bad idea. Stephanie and then Jeff.
There it is. I wanted to kind of add on to what Swapnaya is, do I have that right, said? Just if you think about kind of the now infamous Twitter, we're going to have a hardcore culture. If you don't click this link, you're done, you're out of here. I think what makes it difficult is, at least in the near term, the perception is that can be successful, right? And you can look at some of the Twitter/X releases over the last year or so, and I think there's been some real evidence that the work quality has not been there. But there's just that impression that we can push really hard for a couple of years and we can burn everybody out, and it's okay. The company will still be successful, and therefore it doesn't matter. So I don't know how we, really, it kind of goes back to the I'm a recovering economist. I say I studied political economy because I just couldn't buy into the idea that we were all rational decision makers. And it's that fundamental, no, it's that, but there's that fundamental assumption that so many business leaders and so many political leaders, just leaders in general, really buy into.
Yeah, it's the concept of human capital. And I think that is a horrible misnomer. Jeff and then Swapnaya, I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance.
Yeah, one of the things that really resonated with me in the transfer chapter was particularly when it was talking about how cortisol inhibits your hippocampus, which is responsible for putting things into long-term, short-term memory. And it really made me think about, the change management aspect to our jobs of, if we want to affect change and have people remember what we're doing, why we're doing it, if we're jacking up everybody's cortisol in the process, how is that going to stick? So it was really kind of an eye-opener of, being in tune with the temperature of the team too. How's everybody handling this? Is everybody getting the time off they need and not, working, burning the candle at both ends? Because how are you going to remember? When you're sleep deprived, it doesn't stick.
Yeah, we all become inherently less trusting and less pleasant when we're tired or stressed out. That's sort of a known thing. So thinking about that emotional context that we're going into, we may not be the source of someone's cortisol, but if they are stressed out about something, to your point, Nicole, about an acquisition, there are few things more stressful than having your company be acquired by someone else. That raises everybody's temperature. Swapnaya, go ahead.
I'm sorry, I just wanted to tag on to what I believe it was Stephanie who said that. So many of these companies, right, they make money only for the founders or people who are at the top. Most of those people who are working there think they are going to make a ton of money. They're not. And, especially these kind of Twitter and people get burnt out, but it's at the top that they all make money. Doesn't matter whether Twitter is going to go well or not. Elon Musk is going to go make money, right? They're all going to make money out of this one way or the other. And so that is the problem. So it's kind of what do you say? There's people who are benefiting from, even with this bad behavior, they still benefit. In fact, they benefit probably more. So that is, I don't know if this is common in other industries. I would think so, but I think in tech, it is way more prevalent. Being able to do this, because you can build so fast and put something out there and make money so fast.
You can, and I'm flipping through this top 10 trust article because there is actually, so what you're talking about is kind of a broader contract. We trust in the context of a social contract. So there's sort of an unwritten rule. And for businesses, this article is particularly good. It talks about companies having 3 kinds of responsibilities to stakeholders. Economically, people count on them to provide value. Legally, people expect them to follow not just the letter of the law, but also the spirit. And ethically, people want companies to pursue moral ends through moral means for moral motives. And I think that ethic issue in terms of how companies treat people, and it's not just tech companies, anybody who's ever worked for a consulting company knows that. It is definitely a sense of, I don't feel like you. One of the other versions of the trust equation is that trust comes from character and competence. And part of character is, do I think you care about me? And so a lot of employees do not trust their leaders because they have zero sense that the employers care at all about their best interests. So yes, it's not unique to tech, unfortunately, but I think it is worse in tech. Valerie, we can't see your lovely face today, but you just shared that Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor, whose TED talk is worth watching. She is a neurologist.
She's a neurologist, yeah. And my picture is on because I was attacked by a dermatologist the other day, and she made me have a black eye. So
that's okay. But I love that. And she had a stroke, and she was enough of a brain scientist to be able to think about what was happening to her as she was having the stroke. That was, I think, her first TED talk. But this concept that we are feeling creatures who think, as opposed to being thinking creatures who feel. And yes, that is,
you freeze if you're in a situation where you're not feeling comfortable, and all that upper cortex stuff stops. Interestingly enough, years ago, before all you guys were born, Martha Rogers, who was of Peppers and Rogers, their second thrust was trustability and trustability metrics. And I don't know if they wrote several really good books on trust and from a business perspective, right? And the fact that you had to do all of the things we're talking about here to build trust in a ladder, as it were, so that someone would give you grace if you made a mistake, or would continue to work with you if there was a blip or something like that. And I actually have a number of algorithms and questionnaires for trustability, and the tool that I sold, SuiteCX, actually has a score for every touch point for trustability as well, so that as you're going down a path to whatever, you could score your trust. Are you building trust or staying neutral or removing trust with that interaction? So it ties directly to CX as well, and maybe in some cases is more important.
I love that, Valerie. And I was turning around because I'm pretty sure I have at least one of those Peppers and Rogers books on the shelf back there. but yeah, the idea, this is true with internal trust, but with customer trust in particular, we don't necessarily appreciate how many subtle things we as individuals or organizations do that are signals of, is this a trustworthy company, right? So we talk about earning trust. Well, the way to earn trust is start by being trustworthy. And even a website that doesn't work, or a return policy, things like that. People are thinking about those things and evaluating the sort of character of the organization, and are you an organization that we can trust? Yeah, that's absolutely true. Valerie, can you, if you have it, send me a link to that book if you happen to remember
Yeah, I'll
which
go
book
find
it
it.
is.
I will find it. God, I have it on my bookshelf along with all the others. I will track it down and give you the link. I'm sure it's still around. But if anybody's interested, I do dredge up. I've got a great hard drive. I dredge up some of our things like questionnaires, a trustability questionnaire, and a few other things that I'm happy to share with anybody. So they can ping you, Megan, and you can ping me. But I have just a pretty good hard drive on that. Interestingly enough, again, it started in 1999 when we first started PRG, right? And there was a whole vein of trustability, and then it kind of went to sleep when we all got busy. And then Don and Martha did this one, and I think it's called Ultimate Trust. But I'll go find it.
Yeah, and you can just send me the link and I'll post it on the discussion board for the book club. So we can do that.
Sure.
But yeah, there are actually
extreme trust.
Extreme trust. Okay.
Yeah.
There are a surprising number of frameworks. A couple people mentioned earlier, we don't measure trust. There are actually a ridiculous number of frameworks for measuring trust. Deloitte has something called the Trust ID. That is a whole methodology that they are now selling around measuring trust in an organization. So I do think that there are ways, however imperfect, to measure it. I also think we deal with the fact that the people who would act on the data don't trust the data. Ironically, they don't trust the data about trust.
Yeah, well,
Stephanie?
it's not so
go ahead.
different things like Net Promoter Score and some of the others where you can attempt to quantify it, but is there a direct correlation? So I remember, and again, we did some work for Microsoft and a few others, trust correlated more to what I'll call goodwill than it did to repurchase or acquisition and things like that. And once you got the goodwill, then you could tie it to retention, but it was a one-step process, which made it less attractive than something that everybody goes for the easy kill of, churn analysis.
Yeah, but I think in the world of cybersecurity and CrowdStrike attacks and all of those things, this conversation about goodwill and forgiveness and willingness to not only forgive, but I was reading some other research. The more people trust a company, the more likely they are to actually defend you. So not just forgive you, but defend you to other people when something gets messed up. Stephanie, when you're done taking a sip of your coffee, you had your hand politely raised.
Sure, thanks. I have hope because of the advancements in neuroscience. And I actually did find that was one of the more interesting things in this book, is that he's actually out there like drawing blood and trying to measure and put numbers to the emotion. So like, does some of this become less conceptual and kind of easier to grasp when we can measure what's actually going on in the body and the brain in terms of building trust? And I'm hopeful. Let's just,
Yeah, I think we have created a culture around the myth of infinite measurability, that everything can be measured. and that everything should be measured. And if it's not measured, then it's either not real or not valuable. And so our ability, particularly in business, to deal with imprecision or vagueness or things like that, we have kind of trained ourselves into thinking that there is a world where that will never exist. Not true. And I think a lot of people use that need for data as a crutch. But there is definitely more attention being paid. And this wasn't on the list of questions, but I do want to bring it up to throw it in the mix. I got interviewed by a reporter the other day who was doing an article on how AI impacts customer trust. And there was a study that found that using language like powered by AI in the copy for a product decreased conversion rate. People were less likely to buy it. And so that's this whole new avenue of trust, is how does the introduction of AI call more attention to trust, raise it, lower it?
And that I actually find that fascinating, because just having worked with operations, the more you can automate the basic things, the many, many fewer mistakes are actually made. But I get it. I get a little weirded out when I see that powered by AI too.
Go ahead.
Add on to what Stephanie said. I mean, it is, but the fact that it is helpful for the automation piece, I think it's that the science isn't there yet. People are just tinkering with it. The measuring aspect too, right? What we are measuring, it might not apply to everything. If you have a chat bot that's going to quickly tell you some answer, you are going to like it, right? I mean, it's a simple thing and a simple answer, you will like it. That again is AI at the end of the day. It's not, it's just throwing out some string based of what you asked, but it was more canned. Now we do a little bit more of, probability analysis on it. That's the only difference. So I think we have been gotten there where it's, and of course, everybody's paranoid on AI now.
Well, yeah. So I will mention AI was one of the topics that this group asked to talk about. I have been on the hunt for an AI book that is worth the paper it's written on. There is one coming, being written by my friend Charlene Lee, but it's not out yet. So, and she doesn't know when it's going to be out yet. So once it's out, we will have a book where we can read about AI, but that it's a little bit of skating to where the hockey puck is going. Carolyn, you have your hand raised. Welcome.
Hi, thank you. This has been a really fascinating conversation, and just wanted to chime in with some thoughts from my perspective working in experience design. A lot of the principles of experience design are about testing and learning, right? And so I, in my last corporate role, was fortunate enough to work under a senior leader who, I would say, transfer is one of the principles that comes to mind, but there are many of them here. But she just really encouraged us in the realm of innovation to fail fast, right? And there was that psychological safety that you mentioned that existed around that, because it is known that is what an environment that can generate lots of innovative ideas and some positive change. And I think going back to the automation or the AI, that's where we can apply that. Somebody was talking about, some of the tasks that really are maybe more prone to human error, that are repeatable. And so using AI automation to protect and create that quality, that, consistency, but then also where there is space for innovation, letting humans be humans and failing, and actually rewarding that behavior in the name of innovation, I think is something that I've seen be very successful. And I wish I could see more companies doing that.
Yeah, and I think you're right about the fail fast, and sort of provides data that creates credibility. And so it's not just I'm saying this, we've seen that it works or it doesn't work. I will say I'm not a sci-fi reader. Swapnaya and I were talking earlier about how we're both not really fiction readers. But I did take a course in my undergrad called Science and Fiction in the 20th century, which tells you how old I am. And it was about the interplay between science fiction and science, and how a lot of technical people and scientists read science fiction, get inspired to try to create things, and it's this loop. And I think a very real piece of the trust issue around AI is movies and television and dystopian technology, intelligent beings. A movie can do it. What's to say it can't happen in the real world? And that is one of those fear-based, we're feeling people who think. We feel that first, and it's going to take a lot of thinking for us to go, are you sure that's not actually going to happen? Yeah, absolutely. I will also introduce, I threatened to do, Jerry, were you raising your hand, or were you just waiting?
No, just two things. One is next time you go book shopping, I want you to take me with you. Second, on that question you just asked, I think there's, for everybody's personal mental health, you need to divide the trust question into, so if you're familiar with Stoic philosophy, the part of trust that you control and the part that you don't. So I think, Megan, you're right, and others have touched on this. There are wider forces at play that are suppressing our natural human imperative to trust, whether it's broken promises from technology, whether it's fiction, whether it's the culture divide or what have you, whether it's toxic CEOs and startups. Yeah, we all know they're out there. But in your world, you can make a difference if you lean into your humanity, and you approach people human to human, and you build those trust-based bridges one at a time. And so whether it's on your team, whether it's in your company, whether it's in your community or what have you. So I just caution people to keep that discrimination clear in your minds, because it's sort of like, on the one hand, well, why is there a culture divide in politics right now? Well, we could have a lovely conversation that would go on for weeks about that, but how much leverage do any of us as individuals have over that large scale situation? But any of you can go into your workplace this afternoon, and you can lean into your humanity and the human to human connection, and you can practice and rehearse trust-based behavior and make a difference before sundown tonight. So that's my contribution.
Yeah, and there is actually, Michael, one quick second. There is actually evidence about the fact that you think all your friends and family are trustworthy, but people in general are not. You tend to think you trust your employer, but if I ask you, do you trust employers to treat their employees right? You'll say no.
Your family, your work group, your club, you can see this. That's a great catch, Megan. I mean, you can see this throughout society. I trust the person I'm bowling with, but that guy 5 lanes down that's cursing and what have you, I don't trust them at all, because they're obviously
can throw them.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Michael, sorry to hold you.
I know you want to move on, but I just want
keep
to
going.
offer a little counterpoint, which is fascinating on AI. I just listened to a podcast with will.i.am, for those of you who might recognize him as the frontman of Black Eyed Peas.
Black Eyed Peas.
He's actually more of a technologist than he is a musician in his own mind. He was interviewed by N.M. Grant, and he actually does the only, or at least the first, I guess, on satellite TV, hosts the show with AI. So his partner is AI. So he actually brings up conversations with Fiona, and he asks Fiona to dig into things. But to jump forward, going on the counterpoint of trust, what he actually said at near the end of the podcast was, he actually he's a futurist too, in a way. He tries to see what it'll be like in 10 years from now, which is the Super Bowl get up, but you can listen to that. But he actually says, one of the things that I'm experiencing, which is fascinating, is, with my relationships, when you think about all your relationships with your spouse or other people at work, where you do have confrontations. With AI, there's no feeling. And but it allows me for basically 24 hours of the day, I might have some angst and I could just talk to AI and get it out. And I don't have to worry about saying something that may be offensive and getting a rebuttal or things like that. So in a way, I actually show up to my trusting relationships, my personal relationships better because I use that platform to kind of deal with, and you can ask it advice, right? I'm feeling frustrated about this. What do you think? And it's not personal. And I'll use obviously its database to, to figure out what was a good response. So I found that a little fascinating in a way to think about. At some point, AI will be trusted more, just like the self checkouts, for many years before people even try to use the self checkout, right? So there's not discount that whatsoever, that people will feel more comfortable. And there is a lot of therapy. There's a whole nother topic. Companies actually using AI and people latching onto them and feeling connected to AI better than they have with real people. I think we're way far away from our business, but it is out there.
Yeah, it's a longer term implication of where is brain development going in younger people and younger children, just with screens and all of that. Swapnaya, go ahead.
That is a fascinating insight. I never thought about it, that somebody that they don't, what is also is that I don't know if you guys have read this book called Clara and the Sun. It's a fiction book, but it's about a robot, in a world where every child gets a robot while they grow up. It's a very beautiful book. It's more about how the robots feels than about the people. But what I was going to say is, I don't know if this is the reason why now we have in Japan and all people, buying these robots who are, their companions, and really moving away from real relationships. That's scary, but just wanted to throw that in there.
Oh my goodness, Stephanie, the AI you used most asked you how your brother was doing.
It did.
Yeah, that goes over the creep factor.
And I had to think back. I'm like, what even prompted it? What did I put in there the day before, 2 days before, that brought it up? It was weird though.
Yeah, that is weird. And I think there's also, I was just going back, Carolyn, to what you were talking about and just my own lived experience. I have a tendency to anthropomorphize everything. So I have a giant stuffed animal that is hideous and it looks like a taxi driver from the 70s, but I cannot get rid of it because it has a face. And my mother brought it to me from her house. And so we do such a good job at making these AIs feel human, that to what extent do we stop feeling like it's not actually a person with feelings? And yes, Stephanie, I'm very sorry to hear that your brother is ill. Thank you, Doug, for being more empathetic and attuned than I was.
He's doing a little better. But it's going to take some time. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, and ironically, that's one of the applications where AI first started and has been most useful, is in processing. I mean, this is the other thing, is we talk about AI. There's no such thing as AI. There's ChatGPT and generative AI. There's machine natural language processing. There's, large data set processing. And for better or worse, ChatGPT has sort of stolen the show. Interestingly, I'll tell you guys a story about the younger generation definitely trusts AI more. My fiance is a college professor, and he teaches a freshman business course, and they did a simulation where the kids sat there on their computer and they just fired random emails at them. And the idea was to simulate what it's like to be a manager. And they had to respond to these emails. And one of the young men just took everything, put it into ChatGPT, and gave back what the answer was. And it would never have occurred to me to do something like that. My fiance then told him, congratulations, you just got fired because you just put company information into this model. And he was like, no, I didn't think about that. That's why you do this as a freshman, not as a professional. But yeah, there's a whole level.
But the typical manager would let that inbox get to like 10,000 before they, actually.
A human manager. Yes.
They wouldn't try to deal with them in real time.
Why I'm not a manager. All right. I know some people have to drop off, and I do try to give people the 5-minute bio break in between meetings so we don't go right up until the time we can. But I want to introduce, because it's particularly relevant to this conversation. Hi, Deb. Our next book. So our next meeting will be December 5th. And the book that we're reading, it actually came out in 2008, and it was 2 years ahead of its time. But I read it then. I think it's worth reading now. It's called Can You Hear Me? By Nick Morgan. So Nick is a Harvard professor, communication expert and specialist. And this book is all about how our experience and the way we process things mentally changes in virtual communication. So before any of us were doing Zoom or any of that, he was just talking about like webinars and conference calls and the rare video call that anybody did in 2018. I'm excited I've been flipping through this again, rereading this book a little bit, but this is like the biology of why video calls are more tiring than just plain audio calls, and how the technology. I worked for AT&T, and I actually did not know that because of legacy limitations in telephone wires, there are levels of tone in voice that are stripped out. So when you feel like you can't read somebody's emotions over the phone, those technology limitations have been non-existent for hundreds of years, but they just never bothered to add in those upper and lower registers of tone of voice, of emotion. So there literally is something, thank you, Valerie, it's 4 megahertz. There literally is something missing when you're talking to somebody on the phone in terms of their tone of voice. And so I think you guys will enjoy this, but I think this is relevant to both experience and this topic of trust, because we're building trust with people this way more than other places. It's how our customers are interacting with us. It's how B2B salespeople are managing relationships. And so just understanding the biology of how the human experience changes when we interact with each other through technology, I think is going to make for a fascinating discussion with this group. So
can I share a funny homework assignment?
What?
Can I share a funny homework assignment for people to
Sure.
do? There are 2 things that you can't do with Zoom that you can do in person. One is you cannot see people in 3D. And I think that's probably a lot of what the author you're suggesting addresses. But the other thing you can't tell is how tall they are. So if you have an opportunity to meet someone on Zoom and then later meet them in person, before you actually meet them in person, try to guess how tall they are. And
So
then,
I have, yeah.
and then share it with that person. You know, I guessed you were, 5'7" and, you're 6'4", isn't that funny? I do it all the time, and it's a great conversation starter.
I love that. And I had a very awkward moment with a client early on who I had only ever worked with virtually. And when I first met her, she's like 4'10".
Yeah.
And so it was quite jarring. But yes, the thing about 3D and spatial recognition is also there. So, all right, everybody will come back and guess how tall each other is. I've only met a couple of you in person, so I won't say anything. Someone you worked with grew several inches in the pandemic.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's true. All right. Well, thank you guys. I know we could keep going on this for a long time, but I want to make sure that everybody gets a little bit of a breather in between meetings. I hope you found this book valuable, useful. I will share links to the other trust books that I just randomly pulled out as well, in case you're interested in them. And there's probably 6 more on the shelf behind me. But I think this is a really important topic that we're going to hear more and more about going forward. So I really appreciate you guys just thinking together.
Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.